I'm hungry.
All right, people, we're live. We are looking live.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then their mouth closed because they were ready for history now. Trey, ready? I think we got through all of this yesterday, am I right? We talked about the Battle of Britain, the importance of the Battle of Britain. Why was the Battle of Britain so important? It's a really easy question. You might be hesitant to answer it. First of all, because you hesitate to answer in class anyway. Secondly, because you think the answer is so easy that if you get it wrong, then you'll think that someone doesn't think you're smart or something. Why was the Battle of Britain so important? In unison. It was the first defeat of Hitler's encroachment on all of Europe, right? His design, his plan to take over first, what he decided was deserved German land that already should have belonged to Germany, then to greater Europe, and he's taken over most of the mainland of Europe. But separated from the mainland by the English Channel was this traditional power, this empire called Great Britain. If he could take them out and force them into submission by this incredible blitzkrieg, actually called the Blitz, game over. Europe is under his power, and then from Europe, obviously the rest of the world, if he's going to create this master Aryan race. So the Battle of Britain, so very important. And we watched the video. So this video gives you a quick synopsis of the incredible power and force that the Nazis brought to Great Britain, but then also going to show us that Great Britain, although they weren't as ready for war as Germany was, they were prepared enough that they were able to withstand the Blitz.
The Battle of Britain turned out to be the biggest.
Oh, and it also put in context, obviously this is the first battle in the history of the world where it was dominated by in the air, right? They used planes, but not to this extent.
Biggest air battle the world has ever seen, as it was fought in the air. From May to June of 1940, after France in just 46 days, the eyes of the German war machine turned to England. Targeting British shipping convoys, ports, and factories as their initial strategy, the Germans expected to have just as swift a victory and hoped for a ceasefire, not outright surrender. They had a whole other thing coming. For fighters, the planes facing off were Germany's Messerschmitt Bf-109s and 110s.
Do we have any history war buffs?
Quite possible.
Are you?
Maybe.
Did you ever hear of the Messerschmitt?
No, but I know the Allies won.
I have.
No, I mean like this kind of like Jake's brother Paul. Do you know Paul Walker?
No.
Anyway, he's like really into history, especially war history. Like he could probably name these airplanes. Like if I showed the ones I'm showing you now, then I'm not a real expert on this. He'd probably be able to name all of these before I even put them up there. The planes that they use, the names of them. Anybody like that? Are you into it like that?
And for bombers, they used the Dornier DO-17s, Henkel HE-111s, and Junkers JU-88s. They also used Stukas for dive bombing. On the English side, it was a mix of Supermarine Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes, although contrary to popular belief, the latter did most of the heavy lifting. Though the numbers vary slightly depending on who's reporting, the general consensus for statistics of this battle are as follows. The Germans attacked having 2,550 men.
Okay, remember that number. They went into this with 2,550 airplanes in this blitzkrieg.
The United Kingdom and participating allies. You can see them on the side here.
By the way, those are all the allies in World War II. very little help from all these allies in the Battle of Britain. It was mainly Great Britain.
Had 1,964 serviceable aircraft for defense. Between July 10th and October 31st, 1940, when the battle took place, 2,585 German airmen lost their lives, compared to 544 on the Allied side.
Sounds like a dub for the Allies, huh? 2,585 of these Nazi airmen killed in this several months of their blitzkrieg, where they thought they would just pound Great Britain into submission and force them to surrender quickly. Meanwhile, the British only lost 544.
This was mostly due to the fact that bombers have more than one person on the crew, and when they went down, they took more people with them. In addition, 925 Germans were captured. Another 735 were wounded, while only 420 Allied soldiers suffered injuries. As for equipment losses, the Germans lost 1,977 planes.
How many planes were in the mission? And how many did they lose? Right? A little quick estimation math would tell you they lost almost 80% of their air fleet, right? So if you round that to 2,000, you round the other one to 2,500, 4/5, that's almost 80% of the Luftwaffe was taken down in this, what they thought was going to be incredible, overwhelming force that would cause the Brits to surrender within days, probably.
The Allies, 1,744, which brought the total number of downed planes to 3,741. Now, think about this. Since the end of World War II in 1945, approximately 4,800 planes were shot down in over 50 subsequent wars and conflicts.
How many planes shot down between the Nazis and the Royal Air Force together in that one battle over those 3 months? 3,700. How many airplanes shot down worldwide in all the other wars and conflicts since World War II? 4,800. That's how intense those 3 months living in Great Britain were from July through October of 1940.
That's only 1,000 more planes shot down in a span of over 75 years than in those 3 brutal months combined. Now, let that sink in for a minute. Despite the odds, the British held off the onslaught of the Luftwaffe and served Germany with their first major defeat, and although the Luftwaffe continued bombing England, they set their sights on a new target: the Soviet Union. The Battle of Britain turned up.
Okay, back to the notes. Any questions, comments? Incredible, eh? What is going on? No questions, comments? Incredulity? Anybody incredulous? Is that a big word? I mean, just think about incredulous, the root of it, like incredible, right? Is that information so incredible that you are incredulous? You're like, I can't even hardly comprehend that there would be that many. You've got 2,500 bombers flying over in Great Britain, what is it? The size of, I should know that. What would be a comparative state? Great Britain, probably the size of, a little bigger than Florida, maybe the size of total area, not close to Texas even. And you've got 2,500 of these bombers just over 4 months flying over your country, maybe over your house today. How did they withstand that? How did everyday people and the British Royal Air Force, how did they all muster up the will under that constant bombardment to not only withstand it, but to defeat it? Anybody? What would it take? let's say something like, God forbid, let's say something like that would happen in America. What would it take to get Americans to dig in and have the will to keep fighting? What would it take?
A lot of courage.
Okay, and let's take that root of that word, courage. Sometimes we don't have the courage within us. We need to be, put an EN in front of that, encouraged, right? So what I'm leading to is, in times of crisis, if you look throughout history, when countries or civilizations meet crisis, what determines whether they last or not, and what determines whether the people are going to be able to maintain and muster the will to survive, is strong. Who said that? What? Leadership. Right? If the leadership of a people isn't strong, most likely that maybe initial wave of, hey, we're going to defend ourselves, but then, man, these people are overwhelming us. If there's not someone out front, whether it be in the battlefield itself, like George Washington, or in this case, some of you already know who I'm going to be pointing to in a second, England had that someone that just came into the position of prime minister just at the right time, incredible timing, not quite biblical, but for a time such as this, a man that was able to capture the attention of the country and capture the will of the country and keep encouraging them by really, if you think about it, being straightforward and honest with them, saying, look, this isn't good, and it's going to take everything we have, and we can't keep living in denial, as Neville Chamberlain was, saying, hey, maybe if we just negotiate with this madman, he'll stop what he's doing. Someone that made them face what they were up against, told them that it's going to be long and it's going to be difficult, and if you don't muster up everything you have, then Great Britain's going to fall. And he got people to do it. His name was Winston Churchill. This lifelong politician that had been in politics for like 40 years and was in and out of being in a position of major influence. But in 1940, for whatever reason, he rose up in prominence again and became prime minister right before the Battle of Britain. And most historians would say, without his leadership, would they have folded? Would another leader would have said, whoa, time, let's negotiate some peace here. This Luftwaffe is overwhelming. How long can our people stand? How many days and then weeks and then months can we stand being constantly bombarded before the people cry out and say, hey, can we just make this stop? Is this really worth it? You know, see what I'm saying here? Like, if there wasn't that strong leadership that said, no, we're going to persevere. It is hard. I know it's hard. But if we give in, that's it. Our whole history goes up in flames. So he got people to dig in and never give up, which is what we're headed to now. Winston Churchill. So, again, a guy like Winston Churchill, you go to the library, you find probably literally hundreds of books, people that have written about Winston Churchill in history. We got like one slide trying to summarize Winston Churchill. As you know, he became prime minister in 1940. He's going to be prime minister till the end of the war. And then the way politics goes, once the war's over, you know, what's the strategy of the country going to be? Well, the people voted for another party. Not necessarily did they not vote for Churchill, but the way politics works in many places in the world, especially Europe, parliamentary politics is that most countries in the world don't just have a two-party system like we do. They've got a bunch of political, we might have talked about this before. they have a bunch of political parties who then form coalition governments, right? And then from that, this party, the Green Party, they're worried about the environment, and this party's worried about Christian morality. And those parties kind of coalesce together and they say, hey, we're going to work together because we want to have more of what we want done in Parliament. And from that, they pick one leader who becomes like prime minister. So for 6 years after the war, the other party got voted in, or the other coalition, and they chose a different prime minister, and then Churchill was back. But if you go back to the beginning, his first election into politics happened way back in 1900. So this guy spent, again, 40 years in politics before his moment came. And he was elected parliament after he went down to South Africa. And at this time, there were imperial wars going on. What does that mean? Africa at one time was this battleground for all of these empires. The British Empire, the French, the Dutch, the Germans. They were all trying to get a piece of this new frontier called Africa. Used to be kind of, a lot of Africa was unknown. They called it the dark continent, not because of the color of the people's skin, because of all of the unknown about it. Like, hey, there's not much we know. So by the late 1800s, it had become a place where most of the European powers were trying to go there and establish their territory. We mentioned with Mussolini. Mussolini said, hey, I want to be a part of this. So he's like, hey, is there any place available that hasn't been claimed by like England or the Dutch or something? Oh, Ethiopia. I'll go in there and take Ethiopia. Yeah, see, Italy's part of the imperial wars too now. So one of those wars was called the Boer War. And Churchill is down there actually as a reporter. Well, there was this rescue of British people, and Churchill happened to be part of that rescue. And by being part of that rescue, he got captured and was put in military prison, and then he escaped. So when he comes back to England, he's heralded as this great war hero. Well, what's one of the quickest ways to be elected in the government? To be a war hero, right? People, that's a pretty good step towards launching pad for politics. So that's how he became a politician in the first place. And he continues to rise. He rises up into national politics. First you get elected at the local level, and he rises up. So by the time World War I gets here, he's a leader in the British Navy. And of course, the British were successful in World War I, right? Part of the Allies. We won. But Churchill personally kind of started to fall out of favor politically. So after World War I, he's going to spend the next 2 decades kind of like in, he didn't totally disappear, but as far as the national political scene, he was not as prominent or influential. He would get elected he would move to one town or shire in England. He would get elected there locally, and then he would go, and he spent a lot of time writing books, and he's a painter. Didn't make a living with his painting, but he loved painting, kind of like, I don't know. I should someday look at who's the better painter, Hitler or Churchill? Both of them would be considered starving artists, I guess, because they didn't make a living painting. But those were his interests: politics, writing, painting. So for 2 decades, this guy that once was pretty prominent has kind of faded from the national scene. Then Hitler rises. And as the tide of Hitler's rising, you've got, fast forward to today, and we're not, again, Mr. Franken is not saying that World War III is about to start. It's just interesting to look at what's happening and kind of compare, when we look back at history, what Hitler did. I'm not saying Putin's Hitler, but I'm saying you can draw some parallels here to what Hitler was doing before World War II, and maybe what some people can say, look what Putin's doing. I'll take a little bit of this like 8 years ago, he took Crimea, which was part of Ukraine. And now, as of yesterday, he has sent his troops across the Ukrainian border. David started the class. Before class started, he said, so Russia invaded Ukraine. And unfortunately, we have to start a conversation about the meaning of the word invade. All right? Because depending on who you're listening to, the people in government and in the media, some will just say, hey, you got to call it what it is. He outright invaded Ukraine. Obviously, if you send your military over the border, hello, that's the definition of invasion, right? Then you've got this other group of people that are saying, well, he didn't really invade, because what he's trying to say is that his troops are there as a peacekeeping efforts. And that was 2 days ago. And now yesterday, by the way, Putin is declaring that the place that he went into in Ukraine shouldn't actually be part of Ukraine, and he's declaring it like an independent state. He is, right? Not the people of Ukraine, not the leadership of Ukraine. They're not agreeing with that, but Putin is kind of like playing this big game with the rest of the world, right? Especially Europe and the United States. Like, okay, well, it takes me back to, I think I mentioned this yesterday, a month ago, and finally, last night, I heard people on the news. I said yesterday I was complaining they weren't bringing it up. I remember Biden standing before a press conference using the words similar to this. You know, what's the United States response going to be? Well, hey, we're going to give tough words here. If he invades Ukraine, we are going to have a swift and strong response, and he better not do it. And then he added these words, unless it's like a minor incursion. What does that mean? Well, Putin was listening, right? So what's a minor incursion? I didn't invade Ukraine. He didn't cross over the border with tanks and guns blazing and start killing people. He's just occupying it for their good. So I guess that counts as a minor incursion. So did Russia invade Ukraine? David, you asked a question at the beginning.
Kind of. Yeah.
Like, shouldn't it be a simple answer? Like, doesn't the word, like, all through history, hey, that country invaded that country. But here we are in this world of semantics, like, what, did he really invade? And who's controlling the narrative here, by the way? Putin is, right? He's going to claim that he didn't invade. Just like Hitler was controlling the narrative before World War II. Again, I am not saying we are headed to World War III. It's just interesting to be learning about this at this time and see how Hitler was taking this area, taking that area. And even though this is limited to just one independent country, just kind of seeing how there's parallels here. And Putin says, I take Crimea. Nobody does anything about it. I'm going to go into these two areas. I forget their names. I apologize because I couldn't pronounce them. But these two areas of eastern Ukraine and declare that they're not really part of Ukraine. So Russia needs to make sure that peace is kept there. Then what's next? I mean, what would be the logical next thing? If the world doesn't react and do something about where he's going, what would be the obvious logical next step? Anybody? Huh? Right. That he's gonna, hey, nobody's doing anything. Because listen, in his mind, I mentioned this yesterday, Ukraine is already supposed to be part of Russia. He's I think he's going to be 70 soon. He is a quote unquote former Soviet who wants to rebuild, just like Mussolini wanted to rebuild Italy back to the Roman glory days. Putin wants he's an old Soviet guard. He believes that Russia should be the USSR. He wants to bring that empire back. And Ukraine then, which was once part of Greater Russia as part of the USSR Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, that should be rightfully theirs anyway. So he's telling the world, or he's telling his people and the Russian leadership and government, Ukraine's ours anyway. We have every right to be, quote unquote, having our troops in Ukraine. Because we should be back to our glory days before the end of the Cold War. So, what's the point to this? Churchill is one of those voices in England that's saying, hey, we got to start taking this guy Hitler very seriously, not like Neville Chamberlain, who was, what was that big word, starts with A? We want to talk to this guy and negotiate peace. Right, what is it, fella? Appeasement, right? Churchill was not into this whole appeasement thing. But there was division in Great Britain. Like, what do we do? Nobody wants to go to war. By the way, does anybody in America want to go to war? Who wants to go to war? Matter of fact, we just took the last of our troops. Well, unfortunately, there's still people there with that bungled evacuation of Afghanistan. But the whole point of that was the Trump administration decided, you know what, we're done with this constant war. So we were going to take our troops out. Biden became president. And I know with the execution of taking the troops out, that didn't go so well. But the America's sentiment in the last 4 years have been, okay, we're done. We understood the war on terror after 9/11, but it's 20 years later. We need to stop being so involved in other people's business in the Mideast. So now a lot of Americans are saying, why should we go to send our troops to Ukraine? What does that have to do with America? How does that affect us at all? Except maybe when your parents go up to get, or some of you. Anybody using their own money for gas right now? So that will affect us as the price of oil keeps going up. By the way, I think I probably mentioned who's that benefit the most? The Russians and Putin, because they're exporters of oil, and if the price of oil goes up, they benefit from that greatly. Anyway, Hitler, he's part of the people in Great Britain that are saying, we cannot keep negotiating with this guy. He's a madman. We've got to face him head on. Winston Churchill. I know if I was your age, I probably wouldn't appreciate this speech as much as I do now, but I hope that you'll listen. And this is, if you remember the Man in the Arena speech by Roosevelt, that's what his most famous speech is. This is Churchill's famous speech that was given to the British people that enabled them to withstand I guess we'll have to be entertained by Liberty Bibberty. One of the most famous speeches in history.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask what is our policy? I will say it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might and all the strength that God can give us. To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. But what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory there is no survival.
Now we are the masters of our fate. That the task which has been set us is not above our strength. That its pains and toils are not beyond our endurance. Long as we have faith in our cause and an unconquerable willpower, salvation will not be denied us.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
In the
much hope by so many. So, we shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans.
By the way, that quote 30 seconds ago, that's the most quoted part of this whole speech. That if the Commonwealth, if the British Commonwealth lasts another 1,000 years from now, they will say what? This was their finest hour.
We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Never give in. Never, never, never. In nothing, great or small.
Maybe Coach Scott should show this Friday before the game.
Large or petty, never give in, except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. We stood all alone a year ago, and to many countries it seemed that our account was closed. We were finished. All this tradition of ours, our school history, our songs, this part of the history of our country, all were gone and finished and liquidated. Very different is the mood today. Britain, other nations thought, had drawn us started across our slate, but instead our country stood in the gap. There was no flinching, no thought of giving in. And by what seemed almost a miracle to those outside these islands, though we ourselves never liked it, we now find ourselves in a position where I say we can be sure that we have only to persevere to conquer.
Never give up. Lights, please. Questions, comments? For a time such as this, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister, just in time.
Hey buddy, what are you doing over there? We're starting the same thing. I'm lost. Oh, it's Saturday to fall, it's like that.
Yeah.
Oh, 3 words. Yeah. I think 3 words. Yeah. Golf. It's better than it is, though. Yeah. Yeah. And then you basically have to swing like a slice to get it to spin back on.
Can't see me.
Yeah. Well, maybe fade. Yeah, but I don't want to play that. That's wrong. Yeah, I just want to play. I want to try and get higher. Yeah. I want to draw a rock, but that's impossible with the one. Yeah, it doesn't.
What do you got?
It's a Callaway, but it's like. The new one's
Rogue. It's like gold. This one's
Rogue.
yeah, the new Callaway Rogue, it's like an XT or whatever. It's got some in the they're like,
I didn't hear about this. There's where's it at?
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
I have no
there's
idea what it is.
Saudi Arabian League, and they're offering him a ton of money to play for him, like more money than he's getting paid now. And he was saying he might go there just for the money.
Bryson's about to do it too.
Yeah,
So that means some of the top guys can go over there.
just to pay him a bunch of money.
And I thought Phil got in trouble for saying something against.
Like we go to the same place.
Well, basically, because he'd be kind of just like not being loyal to the PGA because that's where like he's always been at. So for him to just leave for the money, everyone's saying that's kind of shallow. But yeah, so who knows?
I don't wanna live with.
I thought he offended somebody.
He might have. I've heard about him, but I haven't heard much about it.
Terrible.
Taylor, how you doing? Is your basketball done?
No, we have one on Thursday. That's the last one.
Done.
Yeah,
Where's that?
Bristol.
They're the host.
Yeah.
So you can defend the championship.
No,
Do you just
Why?
let people
we
read?
lost to them. This is like a third place game.
Oh, so it's just one, I thought it was a new term.
Ooh,
Yeah.
motivation. Oh, did your girlfriend do that?
So he's playing for consolation. Who?
Are you sure?
$100 million, I think.
Rap. What is rap? You're trying to change the
Oil.
subject.
Royal.
They always get to watch videos.
Royal.
Royal rap. Royal and fair. That was a good guess.
Royal Air Force.
Never
Oh,
What country do you
give Western.
I'm thinking Winston Churchill. But you know what? Shouldn't it be
I've
If
actually
it's-
heard of Churchill.
symbol? Shouldn't there be like a period, like RAF, like that?
Raphael.
And where are you reading this?
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Have you ever heard of Percy Jackson? Yeah, just put that
Heard of that name?
It's like the walk route.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was doing there. There's five.
So what's the setting?
It's Greek. Actually, no, it's Egyptian.
Oh.
Oh, it's like it.
This is why we just stuff about history more. So.
Huh?
We went shopping yesterday.
So, Mr. Franken, what are your views on Russia and Ukraine?
Well,
This is
I'll tell you his views, same as mine. The climate change hoax didn't work, neither did the pandemics. They're gonna start to reset some way, so they're gonna start war. They're trying to.
Ooh, conspiracy theory.
Not conspiracy when it's true.
Oh.
There you go. There you go.
Oh my God.
The theory is that climate change goes and overlook.
Colin, you know the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth is? About 6 months.
I'd say less than that.
You understand what I just said?
Yeah, I
Look, a bunch of dead dudes laying around.
I got that.
What the people in power are gonna put down as conspiracy theory, amazingly ends up being true 6 months later.
Max, I want to Come on, we can just talk.
You know what? I don't need to talk because you're about to watch The Great Communicator here in about a second.
No, that was from this.
Oh, never mind, you're not.
I mean, you can let us.
Yeah.
Yeah, Winston Churchill, come on. Yeah,
Who said who's that?
What? Colin said that. Oh.
You did not say who's that when someone said Winston Churchill.
Was it Winston Churchill?
Max is gonna
Famous-
slap.
It's like country.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, no.
Kinda looks really bad.
I know. You're a handsome young fellow, but you're not as pretty as her. You should be right there.
He's got like a spike.
Oh,
on
yeah,
it.
I thought Josh for a second. I was like,
When I had
Mr.
six.
Franklin,
Well, like Josh,
I haven't had that joke.
I mean, I did math.
Like,
yeah.
Mr. Franklin, I said that yesterday.
Hey, did you know what's-
I always have to.
I'm
And you know that it's going to be better to be here in the sun than
I just like jump out of window.
into the cool. Make sure that's not.
Jump out the window, go there for like a second.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was sitting there.
Is Micah not here today? And Nadia not here today? No, they are not. Helen, or Capri not here today. We'll try this again. Yesterday, if you went on there and you were trying to rewatch, Jordan's here today, and she wasn't here yesterday. If she tried to watch the videos again, we're having trouble. Hopefully, Mr. James is going to help us today to get this thing working again. The videos wouldn't load. None of my classes yesterday, so I know that you tried to get on there and watch the video from yesterday's class, right, Jordan? Carly.